Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our first webinar of 2023, hosted by Nomensa's Principal Experience Optimization Consultant, Peter Kay, and SEO Consultant, Gemma Dolby. During today's webinar, which is switching from Universal Analytics to Google Analytics 4, Pete and Gemma are going to be sharing with you why you should switch to GA4 and their experience of implementing and using the new system, including the challenges they encountered, such as tracking page views in single web page applications, and the solutions they designed to both help us and our clients make sense of this paradigm shift in analytics data. As usual, please do join in the discussion in the chat. Please make sure your chat settings are switched to everyone and not hosts and panelists, and that way everyone can see your messages. And if you've got any questions, you can submit them using the Q&A function, and I'll get through as many as I can with Pete and Gemma at the end. We are using auto-generated captions. There is a chance some of these might get a bit muddled live, just as is the nature of auto-generated captions. But once we upload this to our YouTube channel, we'll make sure they're tidied up and a bit more accurate. So yeah, without further ado, I will hand over to Pete and Gemma to kick things off.
Thank you very much, Henry. So as Henry's mentioned, we're going to be covering switching from Universal Analytics to Google Analytics 4. We tend to think of Universal Analytics as GA3. So you might hear us refer to GA3 versus GA4 at times throughout this webinar. But as we've discovered, it's one of the hottest topics really in analytics today. And we're going to cover off why that is as we move through the webinar. And we're going to, take you through and explore some of the key things that we've learnt as we have got to grips with this paradigm shift that has been foisted upon us by the power that is Google, and we'll explore that as we go along. So, who are we? Henry very briefly introduced us, but let's just go into that in a little bit more depth. So, my name is Peter Kay. You can find me in various places online as Not From Bolton. I am the Principal Experience Optimization Consultant here at Nomensa. So I lead on all things SEO and analytics, which is why I have a very specific interest in GA4. I'm really interested in data and design. As an experience optimization consultant, I spend my days looking for the connection that exists between behavioral quant data and the experiences we deliver so that we're able to kind of quantify and understand them more better and demonstrate the impact of the work that we do as an agency. I've been around for many, many years, seen all sorts of changes in design and digital. And on a personal note, I'm massively into mountains, big fan of snowboarding and mountain biking. And I'll hand you over to my colleague to my left.
Hiya, my name's Gemma Dolby. I am an SEO consultant at Nomensa. I actually have a combined background in graphic design as well as Google Analytics and search engine optimization. And I've got a really diverse range of client experience, anything from really small local businesses to some really, really big clients, working on all sorts of different things from kitchen manufacturers all the way up to really big e-commerce. And if you want to know some personal background about me, I am really into traveling. Recently come back from Iceland and I'm just about to book a trip to Vietnam.
Nice. So that's us. Who are Nomensa? If you don't already know, we are a strategic user experience design agency, and we work with a wide range of clients across many sectors in many different guises and sizes. And our mission statement here at Nomensa is to make groundbreaking digital experiences that make a measurable difference to the way people use digital technology to live, work, and play. So as the experience optimization lead at Nomensa and this team, Gemma and I are very much interested in understanding the measurable difference and spend our days working with clients such as this and their analytics teams to help get to the bottom of the data that they hold and the insights that it creates. What are we going to be discussing today? So just to give you a brief overview, we're going to be looking at why you should switch to GA4, what are the challenges in switching to GA4, how to begin designing a solution within GA4, and the best time to make that switch. Or breaking that down a little bit further, we're going to share with you what we've learned about GA4, starting with how events work, looking at how that relates to the reporting dashboard, and we're going to explore how to design a GA4 instance from scratch. Or in other words, how to ask your analytics team for the right thing at the right time.
So I thought we'd start with, what is Google Analytics for? So the pros are, it's a fundamentally new platform for Google Analytics, and this is very much measured around a user-centric idea of user journeys around your website. It's been built with an idea of a cookieless future, and what that involves is data modeling to kind of build into some of the missing data that you might have from people not accepting cookies. The cons are, it's actually not an automatic upgrade, and it's not like you can just flick a switch and upgrade either. Because of this kind of fundamentally new event model that they have, the data does not connect in any way, shape or form. And also we will cover this, but it's still in development. So some of the things that we have gotten used to using have been moved around, and they're still releasing updates as we go. So what are the key dates that we need to think about? Well, on the 1st of July, 2023, your Universal Analytics will stop recording any new hits on your website. You will still have access to some of the data, but that is only until the 1st of January, when Google has hinted that it might start deleting your data. So this is something we need to think about. What are we going to do with all of this old data that we might want to measure any kind of progress against? So what is different about GA4? So I've briefly hinted to this. They now use what's called an event-based data model. So Universal Analytics, which is the one that you'd be familiar with, or GA3, is centered around session data. So a session is when a user enters your site and then when they leave it. Within that session, you would have been able to track custom events, but there would be limited data for that event. So it would be category, action, and label. GA4 now uses what it's called event-based tracking. So as you can see on the slide here, everything is now measured as an event rather than having a separation between custom events or page views. It's all just an event. GA4 will then associate these events with the same user, and this will be regardless if they've left the site or returned. So it's thinking more about this joined up user cross-platform kind of tracking idea. So we've kind of created a bit of a model here to try and explain what this looks like. So you have an event that happens on a website, and there are now, I think, additional bits of information that you can add to this event known as parameters, and they come in two different types. There are event parameters and user parameters, and these are created using Google Tag Manager variables. And so the parameters for this event will tell you little bits of extra information about that event. So that could be like a page title or button text. And so that would allow you to say, okay, well, a form was downloaded on this page and by this type of person potentially. And so then, sorry about that. All of this event data is then joined up into a user ID, which is represented by this kind of red bubble. And so then what this looks a bit like is this kind of big data set of users with different events associated with them, and then different event parameters associated with those events. So each user ID will contain event data from more than one visit. So this is moving away from session data towards user journeys. And this will allow you to create reports segmenting your users based on their user data rather than just looking at a single session. During the GA4 setup, you will be able to turn on some pre-built tracking events, and these include page views, scroll depth, outbound links, site search, video engagement, and file downloads. So this user-focused measurement that we've kind of referred to looks a bit like this. So in GA3 or Universal Analytics, you've kind of got these sessions that happen and then some maybe custom events associated with those sessions. But in the new one, you've got a user ID that then has different events associated with them, and that could come from any kind of number of sources, whether it's your app data or your website data. So GA4 will identify unique users through a user ID, Google Signals, and potentially even device ID. And this allows it to pull all of those events together into a single journey across multiple touch points and multiple visits. So this is because moving away from Universal Analytics session data, because we now understand that the user journey to conversion has multiple touch points for a website, app, or social media, etc. So we've kind of mentioned this a bit, but now with your current analytics tracking, you will have to have a different property for whether you've got a website or app data. And this is just because of the way the data comes in. But with GA4, you can now connect these into one property. So this kind of adds to that idea of building up that picture of a single user journey. And now you can track, not only can you track more information about their journey, but you can track their journey between your app, your website, or any kind of source that you may have.
So it's far more complex in many ways, GA4 than Universal Analytics, which is, I suppose, a natural progression of the environment in which we all work, which is digital, is getting more complex. And Google Analytics is really just, I suppose, matching that with a product that enables us to understand what's happening in more useful ways. And that fundamentally is why you can't really just flick a switch and move from the old system to the new system of Google Analytics 4, because the data is being collected in very different ways. As I'll show you in a moment, is being represented in slightly different ways. So what we're going to do now is jump out a little bit and we'll have a look at the demo account of Google Analytics, which is available for anybody that wants to play around with it. We'll walk through some of the key areas and features that this environment creates. So here's one that I prepared earlier in true Blue Peter fashion. This is a Google Analytics 4, the homepage effectively. And in this environment, you get a bit of an overview of what's happening in your account. So it looks quite familiar. If you're familiar with Google Analytics 3 or Universal Analytics, it looks very much the same. The way I like to think about it is, I suppose it's a bit like it's talking the same language as Universal Analytics. GA4 and GA3 come from the same place. So the design patterns are very similar. The way in which they present the information is very similar. But in that respect, whilst it's talking the same language, it's a bit like it's got a very strong regional accent. So what I mean by that is it's telling you the same things. You look at it, you think you should be able to understand this straight away, but actually it takes a little bit of time to train your ear and start to truly understand what Google Analytics 4 is telling you and how that relates or doesn't relate to what you see in Google Analytics 3. And I'll be honest, we've been playing around with this for a long time across a lot of projects, and it's still presenting new things to us all the time, and we're learning more and more the more we get into it. So as I say, this is a demo account called Flood It. If you were to Google that and have a look around, you'd be able to get into this and set this up for yourself, so you can go and have a play with it safely without affecting your company's analytics at any point, just to kind of see and get a feel for it. So this is the home page. You've got over here the ability to draw in insights, which basically give you high-level overview of some of the key areas that Google Analytics would like you to consider. So things like basic performance. You can ask questions like, how many users did I have last week? On what days do I get the most users? So all the sorts of information that your marketing team or yourself may well be very interested in. And you can build these out, and then they will drop in to other parts of the report. So I'll close that down for a second, and we'll come back to this and we'll scroll down. So you've got the amount of users, the amount of new users, average engagement time, event counts, all very useful information. You're able to then locate that to a particular time frame, and Google gives you lots of options on that front. It provides you with a degree of short-term information in terms of, you know, who's visited your website in the last 30 minutes. This is a collection of the recently accessed reports that you've gone to, and you're able to scroll things along to the left and right as that. Just giving you a high-level view as well. It gives you an overview of, you know, what countries people are coming to you from, the sources of those traffics. So is it direct? Is it paid search, display? How effective are your marketing campaigns? How effective is your pay-per-click? You're then able to see the amount of views that particular pages are receiving. And it tends to present this stuff by page title and screen, as opposed to URL, which we might be more used to in Google Analytics 3. And again, you can flick through this by just scrolling on the right, and it gives you more and more options. As I mentioned, the more and more insights you open using this little button up the top here, and you start to ask these questions, the more and more those insights become populated as cards down at the bottom here within your homepage view. So it's a dynamic environment. It's something that Google is playing around with, as they always do. They A/B test everything that they do to the nth degree. It's pulling in on the basis of the kinds of things that you look at more often into this homepage view. So if you go over into the top left-hand corner, you can see the menu open up, and you've got Home and Reports, Explore, Advertising, Configure, and right down in the bottom left-hand corner, you've got Admin. I'm going to take you now into the Reports section, which again, may well look quite familiar if you're used to Google Analytics 3, but it's giving you perhaps different perspective on the information it's collecting. I remember Gemma mentioned a few minutes ago that this is an event-based model. It's very much focused on what your users are doing and assigning a unique user ID to everybody that comes to your website, so that they're able to understand the actions that take place around that user. So it's much more focused on breaking that down and segmenting it, which Gemma's going to cover off a little bit later on in the report, so that you're able to understand user behavior as they navigate around your digital estate, which could be app, could be website, a combination of many different environments or services. So in the reports environment, this is where you can go in a little bit deeper. It gives you, again, a snapshot of what's happening. It breaks down your reports into deeper reports that focus on specific areas that you might be interested in. So, for example, one of the out-of-the-box options or solutions would be for games reporting. So you're able to put this into your gaming systems or into your games to understand the analytics and the behaviors of those environments. Breaks it down into life cycle, into user, into all sorts of different stuff that comes out of the box. You're able to access a real-time report, which gives you an indication, obviously, of what's happening across your website right now. With any of these reports, you're able to open up in a comparison. So you've got the standard default is effectively all users here on the top left-hand corner, but you can add a comparison. So over here, you can select the dimensions. So this is where we're starting to get into some of the stuff that Gemma touched on a moment ago in terms of those parameters, those additional pieces of information that are attached to the events and to the user ID. So you can now select particular dimensions. For example, let's go with age. And we'll select all the 25 to 35-year-olds and hit OK and apply. And what that does is straight away creates a comparison. Unfortunately, nobody between that age group joined or had a look at the website, so we're able to go back in and edit that comparison. So let's have a look. Let's drop. Let's go with that one. See if any new users applied. No. But you can add any number of conditions and really drill down into specific, comparisons that you may want to apply. This is, as I say, Google's training environment, so we're not responsible for the data that it holds, which is why some of this stuff works and some of it doesn't. Obviously, if we'd set this up, it'd be working fantastically, very smoothly. You'd have all the data available that you needed. But so we're in the real-time review view. If we go back to the snapshot, we are able to drop into deeper reports. So this is an acquisition report, gives you an indication of the amount of users within the time frame. Up here in the top right-hand corner, you can adjust that. You can see what sources they came, how often they come back to your website, the lifetime value. So it ties in with all of the other commercial aspects that Google is so good at creating, such as advertising and your checkout. And there's any number of these deeper reports along the left-hand side. Within these reports, again, there's a degree of flexibility. So you're able to edit those comparisons and move around the widgets or change the perspective that you're looking at, which is the kind of thing that you're able to do in Universal Analytics, but not to the degree that you're able to do it in GA4. And I think in some respects, that's where a lot of the confusion comes from, that translation from the old to the new, is working out what is the same, what do they call that thing that I used to look for in GA3? What is that now called in GA4? And you can spend hours digging around trying to recreate similar reports in that environment. As you can see, lots and lots of information, all presented in tables and graphs. Pretty standard stuff from an analytics environment. Going a bit further, we've got the explorations. So this is where the flexibility of this environment really comes to light. So you've got things in this environment. So you can see straight away that there's a number of templates that are in place that you can play around with. If you open up the template gallery, it gives you an indication of more types of reports that you've got available. So you're able to create reports from scratch, freeform, funnel exploration, path exploration, segment overlap, cohort exploration. There's all sorts of reports in there. And Gemma has just recently written a blog that goes into and explores exploration reports. So please, by all means, go and have a look at that if you'd like to understand more about this environment. When you click into one of these environments, what it does is it basically takes you through to the exploration page and pre-populates this. It's a little bit tricky again because we're dealing with this training system. We obviously don't want to give you access to any of the live analytics that we've got set up. So sometimes this is a little bit wonky. But if I close that down, here's one that we were able to set up earlier. You've got a user lifetime report just loading in there, which you can see down the left-hand side. Again, when Gemma was talking about those attributes, those parameters that you can attribute to events and users, you can start to see there's quite a lot here that you're able to add in and drop into these reports, and you just drag and drop it over. And I would encourage you to go and play around with this as much as possible, because this is where the real value, I think, comes from GA4, which is where you're able to start building out these deeper, more bespoke reports than perhaps you would get within the reporting section. And you can focus them on pretty much anything that you're able to measure within Google Analytics 4. Which I think for me is the real, I suppose, paradigm shift that exists between the old and the new, is this level of flexibility. But with flexibility comes complexity. And that's where it gets really, really tricky. Whilst you can do anything with it, the job is for us to help you to understand, I suppose, what you need to do, what is of value to you in your organization, and what's going to help you to understand what's happening with your users, with your clients, with people that are accessing your apps and your websites, so that you're able to make informed decisions going forward about adjustments and iterations that you might want to make to your digital estate. So if you move further down here on the left-hand side, we've got the advertising environment, which again is very, very similar to reports, but this is very much specifically focused on what are the insights that you can take away from the campaigns that you may be running with Google and AdWords. So it breaks it down into conversion paths, model comparisons. You can break it down by channel. So this is very much more a reporting environment based on that acquisition and lifetime value of customers, which is a key concern for any digital marketer. Finally, down in the bottom, we've got this one here called Configure. So Gemma mentioned right at the start that this is an environment that Google are playing around with effectively. We would hope that they've obviously built something fairly robust, because they're about to switch off the other system and get everybody to move on to this. But as more and more people come online with GA4, what we're discovering is that they continue to iterate, as any good design company, any good user-focused company should do. So they are adjusting and moving things around. So this configuration has moved to admin. So the admin, again, is down in the bottom here. I'm not going to go into this in very much depth because there's a lot of information in here. I would encourage you really to speak to your analysts, the people that are in Google Analytics on a regular basis, if you've got an interest in this, because this is the space where you can really mess things up in a horrible way if you get it all wrong. But the key things you need to think about are the data streams. So this is where you would get the tracking codes that you would associate with your website and your apps, so that you're able to make that connection between GA4 and those environments. You're able to set up your conversion funnels. This one here, debug, as Gemma and I get involved in setting up Google Analytics 4, it's an environment that we rely on this quite a lot. So this gives you a real-time view really of what's happening with your analytics setup, and it tells you the events that are being fired as various users are navigating around the website. As with any Google tool, it's part of an ecosystem. It has dependencies and opportunities to connect with a whole range of other stuff. So you've got things like your ads and BigQuery, which is another real benefit of Google Analytics 4, is out of the box, you're able to integrate it with a data warehouse called BigQuery, and that enables you to store your information and manipulate it in new and interesting ways. So that was very much a whistle-stop tour of what is under the bonnet to a degree in Google Analytics 4. It's a completely new system. It is very different to Google Analytics 3. I would recommend that you get in and begin playing with it really as soon as you possibly can to get a feel for where those differences are and prepare yourself really. So I'm going to hand you back to my colleague now, Gemma, who's going to take you through some of the other bits and pieces that are in GA4.
So one of the things that you may have noticed and are indeed potentially worried about is the fact that in Universal Analytics, you had that massive menu of many pre-built reports for you that covered kind of every single thing you might want to know about your website. What Google have done is very much condense this down into this kind of life cycle view around this event-based data model. So now we've got this kind of idea of acquisition, engagement, retention. But if you are wedded to some of the reports that you had out of the Universal Analytics, there is a feature called Library. Unfortunately, this isn't available on the demo account, but we've screenshotted it just to give you an idea. It's at the bottom here, this button in blue called Library. And what you can do in here is you can customize the left-hand menu to show any reports or groups of reports that you would like to create for your website. So you can create collections which relate to the drop-down menus, and then within that collection you can create customized reports and save them to that, so that if you've got a particular report that's really useful because it's personalized to your business objectives, you can save it there and it can be readily available whenever you log into your Google Analytics account. The other thing to point out is about audiences. So there's this new feature now where we've got predictive audiences. So this is kind of allows you to understand the likelihood of user behavior. Predictions are generally based on the most recent 28 days of your data, and they will only predict for the following 7 days. However, all of this requires a minimum of 1,000 users to create this model. So it's not something that's going to be available to you as soon out of the box. It's something that's going to take time to record. And this is something we've kind of realized that there is a certain amount of time that it takes for a GA4 account to mature, as we kind of refer to it. So there's a bit of this data modeling going on in the background, and your data kind of looks a bit better after it's had a good amount of users visited your site. So out of these reports, we've got things like predicted churn, which is users who are not likely to visit your property in the next 7 days. Predictive users who are predictive purchases, who are people who are likely to purchase in the next 7 days. And then things like predictive 28-day top spenders. And these are users who are predicted to generate the most revenue in the next 7 days. You're also able to use custom events to trigger audience memberships under the configure settings. So when we go back to our kind of event-based data model, where we've got things like user parameters, you could assign people a user parameter for conversions, and that would allow you to create reports based on people who have converted, so that you can understand a profile for them and then go out and then paying more users that match that profile. The other thing we wanted to think about with the exploration reports is that this is a really good opportunity to think about how you can create audience segments, as we've discussed, and apply them to the data. We just wanted to reiterate things like the dimensions that come in. These are your parameters that you are setting when you are creating your events that you want to track. And then metrics are things like a calculated number, so total users and things like that. But you are also able to create metrics from your parameters as well if you wanted to count things, for example. So this is all really great theory, but what we thought would actually be helpful is to actually put it into a real life situation and apply it to kind of some things on your website. So we thought it would be helpful to think about the different stages that go into a GA4 implementation. So the first set is kind of prepare, and this is just your general build a timeline and request, where we would request access to existing Google accounts or people or anyone else it takes to set a project up. Then we would always identify and gather input from key people in your business to understand the business requirements for your project. Then we would gather those requirements and put them together in a design that creates a tracking solution that reflects the KPIs for your business. And then this next set is develop. So this is kind of where we might work with developers to create a data layer, which we will discuss later, and create the solution for your website and build out your GA4 account. And then finally, we've got deliver. So this is basically just a QA or quality assurance pre-launch and post-launch to ensure that your data is coming through correctly. Part of this would involve that debug report that we now get with GA4, which is really helpful. So applying it to a real world solution. So we're thinking about forms on a website is something that we definitely want to track. So for example, here we've got a form to download a white paper. If we pull up our event-based data model, we want to know things about that user when they are downloading a white paper. So you might want to track and understand a white paper download in terms of a marketing perspective. So if we were going to build out an event to track this, we might call that event white paper download because that's what people are doing. But actually, we might want to understand which page that white paper was downloaded because we might have multiple pages that have this download form on. So this event parameter allows us to tie that event to a particular page. And then we might want to track things like a role, seeing as that is available in our form. So we could then model if a particular white paper was popular with a particular role, so that we could then advertise to people in social media using that information. It is, of course, you need to make sure that your kind of cookie policy or GDPR policy is compliant when you're thinking about tracking names like email addresses and names, because they're personally identifiable information. And then we might want to assign a user parameter to that user ID that they have a white paper conversion tag on their event. And so that information about that event would tell us a lot about that person. But we could also split it out so that we could put in an exploration report. I want to know every white paper download that happened on a guide to GA4 page. And so we could then have a look at what different roles downloaded that white paper. Similarly, we could say, I only want to look at a segment of audiences or audience who have downloaded a white paper. And then you could see what white papers they've downloaded and what roles those people might have. So it's all about thinking how you can access that data from different perspectives. And just to put it into perspective, if you are designing it using Google Tag Manager, your tag configuration would look a bit like this. So you've got your event name, which is white paper download, and then you've got your event parameters, page title, role, and then you've got your user parameters, conversion type, for example. So if we were to look at this perhaps from a user experience perspective, we might want to track something like form errors. So this probably doesn't require user parameters because it's not necessarily a user specific error, but it would definitely have event parameters because we're understanding the usability of that particular form. So if we're going to build a tracking solution to understand form errors, we would create an event called a form error so that we could model all form errors in our exploration reports. We would want to know if it was tied to a particular form on a particular page because it hadn't been coded correctly. And we might also want to understand what the error message was. So for example, incorrect email. Or if you are creating a sign-up form, you might want to track things like password errors because people can't create a password that matches the settings that you've applied. And it might mean that you have to create better instructions for your password. And again, this might look a bit like this as a tag. So we've got our event name and our 2 parameters that we're tracking. So it's important to remember you can track quite a few parameters with each event. So you're not tied to kind of 5. But it is important to make sure that all the parameters that you're tracking actually add value to that event and help you understand and model a data that gives you answers to the question that you want to answer. So this is really great in terms of bolting on or creating your analytics solution. However, some of this data is not always available when you're trying to create your tags and your variables in Google Tag Manager. And so what's really helpful is to work together with developers to ask them to customize the data layer. So you've got to imagine the data layer as a layer that sits between your website and Google Tag Manager. Once Google Tag Manager is deployed on a website, this will usually mean that you have the data layer available to you to manipulate. When talking to developers, however, it's actually called a JSON file, and it needs to use the command datalayer.push. And this will push the information that you want to record into the data layer and make it available to you in Google Tag Manager. So we've got an example here from the marketing perspective where we've got the event name was form submit. We've put in the page URL, the page title, we've given the form an ID, and we've given the white paper an ID. And all of this will be available to you to collect in Google Tag Manager when this JSON file fires. And again, we would suggest you have a separate data layer push for if you were tracking error messages. So when an error message appears, this data layer push event happens and all of this information is recorded and available to you to record from the data layer and send to your Google Analytics property. So to understand if this is working or not, you need to use Google Tag Manager preview mode, and you will see your data layer appear under this API call event. And in there, it should look a bit like this. So you've got you've got your data layer push, and you've got your kind of bits of parameters set up, and your the red text there becomes the variable that changes with the event.
Back to me. So one of the things that we said we'd cover at the start of this webinar was the question, when should you start using GA4? With obviously the sunsetting happening in a matter of months, I think the best answer to this question is quite simply today. Today is the best day to start using GA4 if you haven't already. And if you can't start today, then start tomorrow. You really need to get on with this because it's not very far away that Universal Analytics is going to be switched off. And ideally, you want to run the two in parallel so that you can question what's happening, the differences between these two environments, and that you can learn what's going on in GA4 with the backup of GA3 ticking along in the background. So, as I said, 1st of July 2023, GA4 is going to be switched off. So you need to get that account set up, get it going, start playing around with it, start talking to the people across your organization, your business that really need to be on top of this. Get your dashboard set up. So to start playing around with it, the earlier you get on with it, the more time you've got to get to grips with it before the 1st of July, the better that will be for you, because it gives you a little bit of breathing space, a little bit of wriggle room to get your head around the challenges that you will encounter. As I briefly mentioned before, run these things in parallel. If the worst thing I could possibly imagine is on the 1st of July 2023, your GA3 account gets switched off, and that's the day that you switch on your GA4 account. Actually, no, that's the second worst thing that I can imagine. The worst thing is a week later, a month later, you switch on your GA4 account. So there's a gap between the data, but you want this to overlap so that you can see and compare what's going on in these environments and understand the differences, the nuances between them both. And obviously, we've done this a lot of times now across a lot of websites. So if any of the stuff that we've been talking about today seems a little bit concerning, please do pick up the phone and give us a call, and we'll be happy to explore how we can help you. Going a bit further on ahead, so you've got your Google Analytics 4 up and running. GA3 Universal Analytics is going to be switched off. Not switched off, sorry, that's the wrong phrase. The data that you have been collecting for many, many years in your existing Google Analytics 3, your Universal Analytics setup, will begin to be deleted. You can understand that there's probably a huge amount of server space that has been allocated to this globally, as pretty much every website in the world is currently using this setup of analytics. Google is probably quite keen to free up that server space. So what they're saying is they're going to start deleting that historical data in the 1st of January 2024. And the onus is on you as the person responsible for that data to decide what you want to do with it. Do you want to keep it? If you do, you can manually download it into spreadsheets, which is a very simple way to achieve it, but a good way to kind of keep a permanent record of it. And up there in your Universal Analytics, you'll see an export button. If you hit that, one of the options is to export it to Sheets or download it as a CSV file so that you're able to, you know, hold that somewhere else. So I just mentioned Sheets, getting ahead of myself a little bit. I'm very excited because I'm very excited about GA4 and all the wonders that it has to offer. But there is a widget, as it's a Google product. Google have created an add-on for Google Sheets that connects that online spreadsheet tool directly with Google Analytics so that you're able to extract information from one to the other from Sheets itself. If you have a 360 account, if you are a big enough organization and you get millions of hits a year, then you are able to connect your Universal Analytics to BigQuery as part of that service. But there will be other ways in which you can connect BigQuery to Universal Analytics. So there will be plugins that you can get from third parties that will enable you to extract from one to the other. But there will be costs involved, obviously, in the setup of that, unless it's already covered in your GA360 license. So we have covered a whistle-stop tour from our perspective in terms of you know, why you need to switch, when you need to switch, some of the really key features of Google Analytics 4 and why it's different to Google Analytics 3. We're just wondering if there's any questions as a result of all of this information we've dumped in your direction.
Awesome. Thanks, Pete and Gemma. Excuse me. Yeah, super useful presentation. Yeah, so much valuable information in there. If anyone has any questions, now is the time to submit them. So please do submit them using the Q&A function. First of all, though, Pete and Gemma, how much time should people look to kind of set aside to implement a GA4?
You can take that one. I think they've heard enough from me.
My first response would be, it kind of depends. I think when I'm scoping a project like this, I really need to understand a few different things. The first one would be, how big is your website? You know, if your website is 100 pages versus a website that is 1,000 pages, you're going to need to allow more time for the bigger that your website is. You also need to think about how complicated your tracking solution might be. So, for example, if you're looking to track just a normal business website, that's going to be a little bit easier because you're probably mostly interested in tracking contact form submissions and maybe a little bit of user behavior on your kind of service pages, something like that. However, if you've got a big all-encompassing kind of e-commerce site, you're going to need a bit more of a sophisticated tracking solution. And that's probably going to add a lot of time onto your project timeline. So I would say if it's a smaller website, maybe a couple of months-ish, I think. What would you say? And then if it's a bit more of a bigger e-commerce site, we're thinking maybe 6 months plus, depending on how much manipulation of the data layer we need to do. If we need to start pulling in developers to create a customized data layer solution, in addition to just tracking what's available there, it's going to start adding in the number of people that need to be involved in the project.
I think one of the challenges we always encounter, and it's not something we do here at Nemensa, but analytics can be often thought as something to do at the end of a build or the end of a project. We'll just bolt some analytics onto that. But hopefully what we've demonstrated to you today and we've explored is actually it's pretty sophisticated, and to really get the value out of this environment, you need to sit down and consider what outcomes you're trying to achieve, and then backwards engineer that through the design process and through the build process to ensure that the right components are in place and that you're tracking the right thing. So that does take time. It takes energy and effort and consideration. So if you are considering a build project, if you're considering launching Google Analytics 4, you need to give it a good amount of time to really get that environment working well for you.
Awesome, thank you. So we've got quite a few questions popped up. I'll try and get through as many.
We'll do our best.
So first question from Alan. Alan asks, do you know why GA4 page views reports a far lower number than GA3 used to?
Do you know what? Gemma's written a blog about this, funnily enough, where we ran some tests because we were scratching our head about this, trying to work out why is there such a big difference between the two. And we set up lots of different ways to basically fire the page view event and worked out as a result of that which one was the closest to universal analytics. In terms of why it happens, I think that the setup of the trigger is key, but also with there being quite a high degree of machine learning built into this environment, the way in which Google interprets the setup, the trigger, the event varies quite a lot. And yeah, it's definitely one we've been scratching our head around a lot. What I would say, and I think back to my days when I worked in healthcare and I was measuring people's, blood pressure and vitals. Occasionally, the machines would give us the wrong readout, but as long as we understood that the information was different than what we expected, we could work with that if it was consistently different. And I think that's one of the reasons why I want folks to get in there earlier rather than later, is because there are differences and you need to understand what these consistent differences are and try and manage them out. But I didn't write the blog on that. Maybe my colleague to the left has got some nuggets of wisdom that she might be able to go in a direction.
I think the only thing that I would add to the answer that you've given is around the data maturity that we discussed. So we definitely found that this kind of, there's like a bit of machine learning that goes on behind the scenes. And so when you literally just deploy the tracking code on your site, sort of regardless of the way you deploy that and regardless of the setup on your site, the Google Analytics 4 needs a few months. Like I've noticed it can take 3 months plus, depending on the traffic volumes to your site, for it to actually be able to learn from the data that's come in and then start producing more reliable data. So I think initially I would say give it time. After I've done an audit of your tag manager setup or the deployment of your tracking code.
Brilliant, thank you. So next question. We have a question that has been submitted anonymously, but they ask, given the size of the shift to GA4, are you seeing some clients move to alternative providers? And if so, which tools are you seeing, and are there any you recommend?
Oh, that's a good question. For a lot of, I mean, there are alternatives to Google Analytics out there. A lot of them are very expensive. Those are enterprise level analytics systems like Adobe Experience Manager, the Sitecore systems. These are more experienced systems. What I would say is, as somebody that explores those environments and obviously reviews the information that they contain, actually Google Analytics 4 seems to be being built in a way that is very reflective of those much more expensive systems, and Google Analytics 4 is free. So I would encourage people to get into Google Analytics 4 rather than perhaps the more expensive enterprise systems. But we deal with a range of clients, so we deal with a range of systems. Obviously, the bigger the organization, the bigger their budgets, the bigger the appetite they have for the very, very sophisticated enterprise systems. So you need to consider that. But I would also suggest, Google, whilst we're just starting up with Google Analytics 4, and it's been around for a little while now, but I have a Google head, I think, in terms of the way that Google thinks with its products, because I've used them for so long. And there's a huge amount of documentation out there, and they will continue to grow the documentation to support people to get the best out of GA4. I'm not so sure that exists for the more niche, larger enterprise systems that are out there.
Cool, thanks. Thanks, Pete. So next question from Jason. First of all, Jason asks, will we be able to get your contact details in case of extra questions, advice? I'm sure people can reach out to you on LinkedIn or drop an email to hello@nomensa.com, and we can share that with the team. But yeah, Jason's question was, Jason says, am I right in thinking that all events can now be recorded as conversations, and there's no need / ability to create specific goals? Is that right?
I'm presuming conversions there rather than conversations.
Conversions, sorry, yeah.
That's all right. You can assign an event to be a conversion event, yes, but obviously it needs to be relevant to a conversion. But yes, there is a huge amount of flexibility within this environment, so any event could be a conversion if you so wish.
Yeah, there's just if you go into like the admin menu, you can view all of your events in a list, and there's just a little toggle. So yes, you do need to assign them as conversions for your conversion tracking that's built into GA4 to start working. But it is as simple as going into your events list and clicking a toggle to say, I want these 12 things to be recorded as conversions. It's not actually limited as far as I know for the minute.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. So we've got time for maybe one or two more. Justin asks, so you can use Google Tag Manager in the same way. So can you use Google Tag Manager in the same way with GA4 as you do with the Universal Analytics? And would you recommend using Google Tag Manager with GA4?
Do you want me to take this one?
Yeah.
So I definitely would recommend using Google Tag Manager with GA4, simply because when you're trying to create these event parameters, you need to use the variables that are already in Google Tag Manager, and that is where you assign the trackable bit of information, or the variable bit of information that you change. There is a subtle difference. So when you create a new tag, you need to make sure that it is a GA4 event tag, and that pulls in a different kind of layout in your tag manager, kind of like the one I showed you was a GA4 event tag. And then the only other real difference is, rather than you creating your Google Analytics UA tracking code as a variable, it is now just a GA4 configuration tag, and then you link that tag to all of your subsequent event tags. It is relatively intuitive. That was one of the easier things I found to learn about the two. It's just making sure that you've selected the correct tag type. Other than that, triggers and variables generally work exactly the same. Excellent,
thanks, Gemma. I'm sure we can squeeze one more quick question in. If anyone that has asked a question which hasn't been answered, by the way, please do reach out to us at hello@nomensa.com, and we can answer any questions you have. So final question here from Ben. Ben asks, can you explain a little more about how cookieless tracking will work in the future and how to prepare?
That's a good question. I think from our perspective, the cookieless tracking relates to the assumptions that the machine learning makes. So it fills in the gaps. So for example, if you have cookie permissions on your website and then you remove those cookie permissions from your website, GA4 works out the difference in traffic and over time fills in those gaps with the algorithms. What that means is over time, well, it means that GDPR compliance is basically built into GA4 from that perspective, or it's built with GDPR very firmly in mind, which wasn't a thing when Universal Analytics came around. So it's much more on the machine learning side of things, definitely. But you know, it's one of these areas that I'm sure Google will continue to iterate and adjust and change and tweak as time goes by.
Awesome. Thanks, Pete. And yeah, thanks, Pete and Gemma. That was fantastic. Thanks to everyone that tuned in. We're going to have the recording available for you ASAP, so please keep an eye on your emails when that pops up in your inbox. Our next webinar is taking place on the 21st of February. This is hosted by Nomensa's Director of UX, Joe Knowles, and our Head of Client Services, George Moriarty. They'll be discussing the power of deep listening and how to harness that. Signups are open now. We'll be tweeting out links to that and posting that on our LinkedIn. So yeah, or alternatively, find that on our Eventbrite page. Finally, registrations will be open for our free virtual web accessibility and digital inclusion conference virtually very soon. So keep your eyes peeled for that, and also news on when tickets go on sale for Collaborate Bristol, which is taking place on 16th of June. Brilliant. Again, thanks, Pete and Gemma, and we'll see everyone again soon.